Except for the trucks rolling down the highway, it's normally just the wind you hear on the prairie landscape just outside of Saskatoon. Every year around this time, this place of land and sky undergoes a sudden transformation. A small city rises across the horizon practically overnight. Long lines of vehicles line up along the highway, waiting for their access to the site. The sounds of the prairie are replaced by the sounds of a farm show. This is Between the Rows. I'm your host, Laura Rance, recording this week's show in the wind at Ag in Motion. Ag in Motion came alive again this year for the first time in 3 years, ever since the global pandemic shut down in-person events. We'll be talking to show director Rob O'Connor about what it's taken to get the show back up on its feet.
Well, we certainly wanted to have a plan in place like we would regularly, but that just wasn't possible because, again, you have to remember we had fourth and fifth waves of COVID that were affecting planning.
We'll also hear from an agronomist about why it makes sense for grain farmers to include perennial forages in their annual crop rotation.
The economics are changing in the fact that forage is suddenly become a big player in terms of price. Many years of forage selling for $40, $50 a ton, it really wasn't economical, and the producers were doing it because their land was benefiting or they couldn't make any money off of this marginal land. But now with hay prices at $100 plus and maybe even up to $250 a ton, as well as the trucking costs becoming so high that it's almost impossible, economically at least, to import hay from further distances.
And we'll hear about what you won't hear if you're using low-stress cattle handling methods. But first, here's a word from our sponsor.
Farm kids are fortunate. We inherit the land and the lessons that come with it. The lessons are more valuable. I learned early on while chopping thistle on our Kansas cattle farm the value of hard work. I use this every day at Case IH. Because if it's valuable, you pass it on. My name is Ryan. I am a farmer, and I work for Case IH.
Case IH, built by farmers.
This is Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Laura Rance. It's been 7 years since the first Ag in Motion event was held on freshly purchased land just outside of Saskatoon, but this is only the 6th time the event has been held live. Like a lot of other events, the show went virtual for 2 years as the world learned how to cope with COVID-19. I spoke to show director Rob O'Connor about how it feels to bring the show back to life. Rob O'Connor, what does it feel like to be back at a live show?
Boy, it's rejuvenating actually to be able to come back to an in-person event, having these big crowds and all of our staff together and all of the exhibitors and farmers that come to the show, having everybody back. It feels really good after a 2-year hiatus.
Just walk me through how big the show is this year. You said that the exhibitors are right back to where they were in terms of the people coming.
That's right. There's 543 exhibitors at the show this year. And what we were hoping, and I think we've achieved, was to go back to where we were in 2019 before the pandemic restrictions were put in place. And I'll give a lot of credit to the team that's part of this show to get us back to where we were. There's a lot of hesitation at the time of planning that would the show be smaller, or would there be... We didn't know the effects of the pandemic, but the team buckled down. We worked with our exhibiting companies and sponsors, and we got it back to where it was.
From all appearances, farmers and industry are happy to be back. This year's event even drew international guests, such as the ambassador from Kazakhstan and an entourage of federal, provincial, and territorial ministers meeting in Saskatoon this week. Ag in Motion celebrated another milestone at this year's show. Its owners, Glacier FarmMedia, the same company that produces this podcast, are now full owners of the land it occupies. Glacier acknowledged the contribution of 3 Saskatchewan investors, Lori Bradley, John Matheson, and Chad Dirksen, who worked with Glacier to make the land purchase happen in 2014. It recently purchased their shares. Here's Rob O'Connor. There was a special ceremony here this morning, just a few minutes ago, celebrating another significant milestone for Ag in Motion. What took place here today?
Well, today we wanted to recognize the people, the individuals who did help us start Ag in Motion with an investment. Their cash investment into the property, both the original property plus the expansion property that we used to create the entire Discovery Farm place. Having them all here just to thank them was very important for us.
So now the land, Glacier FarmMedia has purchased the land that this show lives on?
That's correct. We were able to purchase the shares from those 3 investors so that now Glacier FarmMedia owns the entire property themselves.
Just listening to some of the investors talk this morning, it was really a hit and miss process trying to get this show, the first show, on its feet. What took place in the year leading up to the first Ag in Motion?
Well, there was a lot of enthusiasm by Glacier at the time to start up a new outdoor event in Western Canada, something that was missing in this part of the country, and because they own Canada's Outdoor Farm Show, we felt that there was a really great opportunity to do something. But then you have to go through the process of what location do we want to go to? Can we purchase land? Where do we purchase that land? So we have lots of meetings and a lot of touring around Western Canada to find the right location. Met with the provincial government, several companies that indicated they wanted to have a show like this. And we determined after several months that, this part of Saskatoon was the right one for us. And we went through the process of working with different people who could invest in it. And we were close to a deal in September that just didn't materialize. But on December 16th of 2014, the deal came through, the land was purchased, and the team went to work. And we worked right through Christmas so that we could launch the show at the Crop Production Show in Saskatoon the second week of January.
And how much lead time did you have this year to bring the show back?
Well, we certainly wanted to have a plan in place like we would regularly, but that just wasn't possible because, again, you have to remember we had 4th and 5th waves of COVID that were affecting planning. And so in January again this year, we decided we'd go to the market. So we did the exact same thing as we did in year 1. We went back to Crop Production Show to let all the companies know that, yep, we're going to have a show again this year. So it's great that we can utilize another Saskatoon-based event to get our message out too.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Laura.
Amid the equipment demonstrations, new product releases, and stock dog competitions, speakers were gathering with small clusters of farmers in tents located throughout the site. One of those sessions was about how grain farmers can make more money by planting some of their acres into perennial forages. It seems counterintuitive, but Ken Wall, a forage specialist with Federated Cooperatives Limited, makes a convincing case. Here's our conversation. So you spoke to a group of farmers here today about the benefits of considering forages in an annual cropping rotation, short-term forages. What are some of the benefits that a grain farmer could get from growing forages, whether or not he has cattle?
Well, the first one I would probably point you to is higher grain yields, and that comes from several different factors. One of them is improve the nitrogen benefit from growing a perennial legume in your rotation. Not only do they produce a lot of nitrogen when the roots die, they break down and that becomes available. The nitrogen then becomes available for these annual crops. Another thing is improved soil quality. Roots penetrate deep, get better drainage, just all around better tilth. And as well as the association with mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria, you get really increased population levels in that, allows the plants to have, better scavenging of nutrients from the soil, and then as they break down and then as they die, then those nutrients become available. So there's a lot of different benefits, but that would be the big ones.
And are the economics changing around that a little bit?
The economics are changing in the fact that forage is suddenly become a big player in terms of price. Many years of forage selling for $40, $50 a ton, it really wasn't economical, and the producers were doing it because their land was benefiting, or they couldn't make any money off of this marginal land. But now with hay prices at $100 plus and maybe even up to $250 a ton, as well as the trucking costs becoming so high that it's almost impossible, economically at least, to import hay from further distances. Now suddenly the hay becomes a value here. It becomes a commodity that they can actually sell, and there's extra demand for it.
There's also a lot of discussion from the federal government in terms of climate change and carbon sequestration. How does that play into this kind of scenario?
Well, as you know, one of the targets is that the government wants to have 30% less emissions from fertilizer by the year 2030, I believe. My worry is that there's not going to be enough consultation with the stakeholders, with the producers in the industry, and I really hope that happens. But I really do think one of the things that's going to become a player in this is forages, because again, you can reduce the amount of fertilizer you're putting in, you can add these legumes, you can reduce the amount of nitrogen, you can reduce the amount of nitrous oxide given off into the atmosphere. And as well, with the huge root mass of these forage crops, carbon sequestration. And I really do think that producers need to get paid for that, and I think that's where that's going to become a player. And again, keep up the production, and again, use this marginal land and use some of this land that again is taken out of production.
What tips or advice would you offer farmers that are considering taking that step? I mean, you've been grain farming for a lot of years. You're going to start introducing a perennial. What kind of tips would you offer them?
Well, the first thing is I would encourage them to find a forage guy, an agronomist that knows forages, that can point them in the right direction. And then I would make sure that I guess the first thing is prepare your land. Make sure that you've taken care of your perennial weeds. Make sure you've taken care of other issues that you've got with the land. Proper seed bed, and make sure that it's a nice firm seed bed, and you've taken care of all of that. I would add some fertility at the beginning of the cycle, because it's easier to do that than adding fertility while you're growing the forage crop. And then I would make sure I would get a good seed source. Don't cheap out and buy common seed, especially for larger acreages where you really want to get some production. Spend the money on good registered seed, and and then be patient. Be really patient. Another thing that I would really encourage farmers to do, if you're seeding large acreages, buy some establishment insurance. Forage companies are generally really good in terms of standing behind their product, but sometimes you just know you're fighting Mother Nature, and you're just having you're going to have some issues with establishment. But again, thankfully, not very often.
So generally speaking, treat it like you would your grain crops.
Treat it like you would your grain crop. And that's my biggest complaint with a lot of cereal grain farmers. They'll seed all their cereal crops, and then the end of June, when they've got everything done, the first pass of chemical has been put on, then they'll think about seeding forages. If you get 3 weeks of really wet weather, it can work great. But again, the best time to seed a forage is probably that first 2 weeks of May, when a half an inch of water will do far more than a half inch of water at the end of June.
But if you do it right, and you're selling a hay crop, can you do pretty well economically with this?
You can do very well. Just figure an average yield of 2 ton per acre. You do have some upfront costs in putting the forage down. However, when there's programs that can help you with that cost, so you can almost eliminate that. Then, with maybe a small fertilizer application each spring, it's not that hard to get $450 to $500 an acre with not a lot of inputs. So it really does start to compete with some of these higher yielding, higher dollar annual crops.
Plus you're getting the fertility, soil building effects.
Plus you're getting the fertility and improving your soil, and Weed control, and especially with some of these. So for example, in the southern part of the province, Phantomyces is a huge issue. Some producers have completely moved away from lentils because of Phantomyces. Put in a Phantomyces strain-resistant alfalfa with the grass, leave it there for 5 or 6, maybe 7 years, and go back to growing lentils.
So then, why aren't more farmers doing it?
I think it's education. I think that's probably one of the big things. And again, they're looking at annual crops, and again, you've got a return every year. With forages, you're probably going to get somewhat of a crop the first year, but probably not as much. And for that reason, I encourage people to put a cover crop in. So you're at least getting a green feed. Cut it early, cut it high. Make sure that you're not leaving it there till the end or whatever, and at least getting some return. It's going to affect maybe your establishment a little bit, especially down in the southern part of the province. But I find often that if guys don't do that, then you get things like Russian thistle and kochia coming in, and that will rob your yield as well. So put a low seeding of an annual crop in there, and you'll get some return, and then get ready for next year.
Now, you had a pretty good turnout for this kind of event in your tent today. Granted, there was a rainstorm coming through, but do you get the sense that more farmers are taking a look at this? Yeah,
I do. I've had some events where they haven't been advertised very well. We've had really big numbers show up. And then I can always tell by the discussion at the end of the presentation, guys are really interested, really looking at diversifying their farm, looking at maybe solving some soil issues. And I think that's often the first thing that will drive a grain farmer to growing forage, because sometimes it's just the right thing to do.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
That was Ken Wall, a forage specialist with Federated Co-operator Limited. For our final item this week, we're stopping by the cattle pens at the Ag in Motion site to hear about what you won't hear if you're moving cattle using low-stress handling methods. Here are my colleagues from Canadian Cattleman magazine, Melissa Bazan and Lisa Gunther.
Hi, Lisa.
Hey, Melissa.
So, Lisa, tell me, what do you hear right now?
Not a whole lot. I hear the sound of cattle walking on grass, and that's about it.
Yeah, so that's the sound of low-stress cattle handling, which is a very sharp contrast to the rodeo some people picture when they think about working cattle. To learn more, I spoke to Lee Sinclair at Ag in Motion. So to start, I guess, can you tell me who you are and what you do?
Okay, my name is Lee Sinclair. I work with Merck Animal Health, and I'm a sales rep here in Saskatchewan. I look after the southern part of the province and the eastern part of the province. And my main job is calling on veterinary clinics and talking to them about our products, such as our vaccines and antibiotics, implants, dewormers, etc. So go to clinics and talk to them about our products, but then also go and visit with producers on how to use our products properly and effectively. And that can be cow-calf producers and feedlots. And through that, we also have our Creating Connections program, which is our stockmanship, and it's all online. And so I do a lot of work with my customers, whether that be cow-calf or feedlot, and teach them proper stockmanship. Really, it's tips and tricks, and hopefully to make it more efficient in the production system and help them with their stockmanship.
Right. And how did you get into low-stress cattle management?
So how I got into it is 25 years ago, I worked in the feedlot business, and growing up, my dad hauled cattle and worked in the feedlot. My granddad worked in the auction mart and hauled cattle, and nobody taught me position, distance, angles made a difference. What I was shown was grab a stock whip, raise your voice, go put pressure on them, and we can move these cattle. And we can. We just don't. It's not effective doing it that way. So when I worked in the feedlot, I did everything wrong for years. But as I was doing that, I'm going, there must be an easier way to do this. And so I just started working on it. And one of the things that helped me was Temple Grandin's diagram of the pressure points and where we want to put our pressure on cattle. And I realized, okay, cattle want to naturally come half around us. And so when I started doing that, boy, things got easier. And so I just started working with that. But if somebody would have asked me what I was doing, I wouldn't have been able to explain it. So in 2016, Merck Animal Health started the Creating Connections program. And so we were invited, a couple of us reps from a number of different countries. There were 6 countries. We were invited to the initial training. And the idea was is we would be trained and then go take that program back to our respective countries and then use it with our, train people, not only the other reps within our company, but also train producers and veterinarians. And so since then, I've done over 70 presentations. And each time I learned something different. So it's not that I've arrived. I'm still on the journey and still working on it and still reach out to other experts and get their ideas and definitely listen and watch other people and see how I can make myself better.
And what is it about low-stress cattle management do you think is so effective with the cattle?
I think the biggest effect is production, right? That's what we want, is we want pounds on these calves in the fall. We want decreased sickness, whether that's in the feedlot or even on pasture. So that's the biggest thing. And when we talk cattle industry, it's about putting pounds on these calves quickly and efficiently, and low stress stocking really helps that. So that's the biggest thing. And so again, for Merck Animal Health and our products, if we handle these cattle effectively, my vaccines are going to work better. My implants, I'm going to put more pounds on these calves. So it all ties together, right? The feed companies, for example, right? If they're selling feed, they want their feed to work. So if we handle these cattle properly, the feed's going to be more effective.
And when you were doing the demo, we noticed that you were kind of mimicking a dog, like what a border collie would do. Why do you think that is so successful as well?
Again, back to Bud Williams. That's what Bud watched dogs, and when these dogs can do it, why can't I do it? So what the dog is doing is he's going to one eye, getting movement, but as soon as that dog gets movement, he's going to the other eye. So that's what we kind of need to mimic that. So when I talk distance, angles, and position, that's what we're doing, is we're just changing our position. We're not staying in one position. We're maybe zigzagging back and forth to get that movement going.
Right. And if there are producers who are trying to do low stress cattle management, but it kind of goes awry and they get frustrated, what kind of advice would you have for them to keep going with the low stress?
The biggest, and I had that question right after the presentation yesterday. The guy said, what happens when things get amped up? And I said, if things get amped up, back off. Because we're very good at putting pressure on, we're not good at releasing it. And so that's the biggest thing. If I can get people to take 2 steps back, just release that pressure, it lowers the level of anxiety in those cattle, and then we can proceed again. But that's the biggest thing, is being able to take it off. Right. We're very good at putting it on, we're not very good at bringing it back.
Melissa Bazan spoke with Lee Sinclair of Merck Animal Health, who travels across North America coaching livestock handlers on keeping stress low for animals as well as people. Well, by the time you're hearing this podcast, Ag in Motion will be over for another year. But Between the Rows will be back next week with more stories from our family of publications and events. I hope you'll be back too. I'm Laura Rance.
When you step foot on my farm, you become a part of it. I will tell you all about my land, what's working, what's not, as if we've spent our whole lives together. Our passion for farming makes us a community, and as part of that community, I want to see us all be successful, whether I'm working on your farm or with my job at Case IH. My name is Kelsey, I'm a farmer, and I work for Case IH.
Case IH, built by farmers.